Listen to me very carefully because what I'm about to tell you will shatter every comfortable lie you've been living about yourself, about your masculinity, about the very essence of what it means to be a man in this twisted, surveillance-obsessed world we inhabit. You think you know who you are? You think your shame, your confusion, your constant need to apologize for your existence as a man is natural? Think again. You've been played, manipulated, controlled by forces so subtle, so deeply embedded in the fabric of reality that you mistake them for your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own moral compass. Michel Foucault, the revolutionary philosopher who dared to peek behind the curtain of power, once said, "Power is not an institution and not a structure. Neither is it a certain strength we are endowed with. It is the name that one attributes to a complex strategical situation in a particular society. And right now, at this very moment, you are living inside that strategic situation, drowning in it, suffocating under its weight without even knowing it exists. Every morning when you wake up and feel that gnawing sensation in your chest, that voice whispering you're too aggressive, too sexual, too dominant, too much of everything that makes you fundamentally male, that's not your conscience speaking. That's the panopticon, Foucault's brilliant metaphor for how modern power operates. You are the prisoner in your own watchtower, constantly surveilling yourself, policing your own masculinity, ensuring you remain docile, manageable, ashamed. The genius of contemporary control mechanisms isn't that they beat you into submission with clubs and chains. No, that would be too obvious, too crude. Instead, they've convinced you to become your own prison guard. They've made you believe that your natural impulses, your biological drives, your masculine energy is inherently toxic, dangerous, something to be suppressed, medicated, therapized out of existence. Foucault understood this perfectly when he wrote, "The soul is the prison of the body." Your soul has become the warden of your own masculine essence. But let me take you deeper into this rabbit hole of revelation. You see, what's happening to you isn't accidental. It's not some organic evolution of society toward greater equality or understanding. This is what Foucault called biopower, the systematic management of bodies, desires, and populations. Your masculinity isn't just being critiqued, it's being clinically dissected, pathologized, and reconstructed according to specifications designed by institutions that profit from your confusion and compliance. Think about it. When was the last time you felt genuinely proud of being a man without immediately feeling guilty about that pride? When did you last embrace your competitive nature, your desire to protect and provide, your sexual energy, without a voice in your head telling you these things make you problematic? That voice isn't yours. It's the internalized gaze of a disciplinary society that needs you weak, uncertain, constantly seeking approval and validation from external authorities. Foucault revealed how modern power doesn't simply repress, it produces. It produces knowledge, produces subjects, produces desires, and yes, it produces shame. Power produces knowledge, he insisted, and power and knowledge directly imply one another. The knowledge being produced about masculinity today isn't neutral observation. It's a strategic deployment designed to reshape your very identity, to make you doubt the legitimacy of your own existence as a man. This is where it gets truly insidious. The system doesn't need to destroy masculinity entirely. That would be too obvious, too likely to provoke resistance. Instead, it needs to domesticate it, channel it, make it serve purposes that have nothing to do with your authentic self-expression or genuine power. They want you ashamed enough to be controllable, but not so broken that you become useless as a producer and consumer. Look around you. Notice how masculine energy is only celebrated when it's completely sanitized, when it serves corporate interests, when it's been stripped of any genuine wildness or autonomy. The acceptable modern man is essentially a woman with a penis, emotionally available, conflict-averse, endlessly apologetic, more concerned with appearing virtuous than with actually being powerful. This isn't evolution, it's domestication. Foucault understood that sexuality and power are inextricably linked. Sexuality must not be thought of as a kind of natural given which power tries to hold in check, he observed. or as an obscure domain which knowledge tries gradually to uncover. It is the name that can be given to a historical construct. Your sexuality, your masculine drive, your very understanding of what it means to be a man. All of this is being historically constructed right now, in real time, through mechanisms of control so subtle you mistake them for progress. Every time you see a commercial featuring a bumbling, incompetent father who needs his wise wife to save him from his own stupidity, that's not entertainment, that's programming. Every time you encounter a movie where the masculine hero must be humbled, broken down, and rebuilt according to feminine sensibilities before he can be worthy of love, that's not storytelling, that's behavioral modification. Every time you read an article about toxic masculinity that makes you question your most basic instincts and desires, that's not education, that's psychological warfare. The brilliant cruelty of this system is that it's made you complicit in your own oppression. You police your own thoughts, censor your own words, suppress your own desires because you've internalized the surveillance apparatus. Foucault called this disciplinary power. Power that doesn't need external force because it's created subjects who discipline themselves. You've become so afraid of being labeled toxic, aggressive, or problematic that you've voluntarily castrated your own spirit. But here's what they don't want you to understand. This shame you feel, this constant self-monitoring, this need to apologize for your existence, it's not making the world better. It's not making you a better man. It's making you a shadow of what you could be, a neutered version of your authentic self, a man so concerned with being good that you've forgotten how to be real. Foucault spoke of techniques of the self, practices through which individuals act upon themselves to achieve certain states of wisdom, purity, or perfection. But the techniques being imposed on you today aren't designed to elevate you. They're designed to diminish you. They're not helping you become a better man. They're helping you become a more manageable subject. The real tragedy is how this systematic shame has disconnected you from your own body, your own desires, your own power. Foucault was fascinated by the relationship between power and the body, noting how the body becomes a useful force only if it is both a productive body and a subjected body. Your body has been subjected to such intense scrutiny and criticism that you've lost touch with its wisdom, its strength, its natural confidence. You walk through the world apologizing for taking up space, for having opinions, for wanting things, for being competitive, for looking at attractive women, for having ambitions, for not being sensitive enough, for being too sensitive, for existing at all as a man in a world that seems to view your very presence as a problem to be solved. This isn't natural guilt. This is manufactured shame designed to keep you psychologically colonized. The institutions that benefit from your confusion, universities, media companies, pharmaceutical corporations, therapy industries, they need you to believe that your masculine nature is fundamentally flawed, that you require constant correction and guidance, that you cannot be trusted with your own instincts and desires. They've turned your masculinity into a pathology that requires their intervention, their products, their expertise to manage. Foucault warned us about the clinical gaze, the way institutional power creates categories of normal and abnormal, healthy and sick, acceptable and deviant. Right now, traditional masculinity is being pathologized through that same clinical gaze. Your natural competitiveness becomes toxic aggression. Your sexual desire becomes objectification. Your confidence becomes privilege. Your strength becomes intimidation. Your independence becomes emotional unavailability. This isn't happening by accident. This is what Foucault called normalization, the process by which certain behaviors, thoughts, and ways of being become defined as normal, while others are marked as deviant. The normalization of feminine-coded emotional expression and the pathologization of masculine-coded behaviors isn't progress. It's a specific form of social control that serves particular interests. But here's the truth they desperately don't want you to discover. Your masculinity, in its raw, unfiltered, unapologetic form, is not the problem. The problem is a system that needs you to believe it's the problem. Your strength is not toxic. Their need to control that strength is toxic. Your confidence is not arrogance. Their need to undermine that confidence is arrogance. Your sexual desire is not objectification. Their need to shame that desire is objectification of your humanity. Let me show you exactly how deep this manipulation goes. Think about your relationship with your own body. When you look in the mirror, what do you see? Do you see a powerful, capable being worthy of respect and admiration? Or do you see a collection of flaws, inadequacies, and potential sources of offense to others? This isn't accidental self-perception. This is the result of decades of systematic conditioning designed to make you feel inadequate in your own skin. Foucault understood that the individual is not to be conceived as a sort of elementary nucleus, a primitive atom. The individual is an effect of power. You are not naturally insecure about your masculinity. You have been made insecure through deliberate mechanisms of power that require your self-doubt to function effectively. Your shame isn't a sign of evolved consciousness. It's a symptom of successful psychological colonization. Consider how you interact with other men. Do you compete naturally, bond through shared challenges, respect strength and capability? Or do you find yourself walking on eggshells, afraid that your natural masculine camaraderie might be misinterpreted as exclusionary or toxic? This hypervigilance around your own behavior with other men isn't moral progress. It's the destruction of natural male bonding patterns that have sustained men for millennia. The system has weaponized your empathy against yourself. It has convinced you that caring about others means suppressing your own nature, that being a good person requires you to constantly apologize for being male. But Foucault would recognize this as a classic technique of power. Power is tolerable only on condition that it masks a substantial part of itself. Its success is proportional to its ability to hide its own mechanisms. The mechanisms controlling your masculinity are hidden precisely because they're so effective. You don't feel controlled. You feel enlightened. You don't recognize suppression. You see it as growth. You don't notice the cage. You think you found freedom. This is the masterstroke of contemporary power, making subjects grateful for their own subjugation. Look at how you've been taught to relate to women. Instead of approaching them as a confident, capable man who has something valuable to offer, you approach them as a potential threat to their safety. A walking microaggression, someone who must constantly prove he's not dangerous. This isn't respect. This is self-imposed castration. You've been conditioned to see your masculine energy as inherently threatening rather than potentially attractive and beneficial. Foucault observed that discourse transmits and produces power. It reinforces it, but also undermines and exposes it, renders it fragile, and makes it possible to thwart it. The discourse around masculinity today isn't just describing masculine behavior. It's actively constructing what masculinity is allowed to be. Every conversation about toxic masculinity, every article about male privilege, every therapy session focused on deconstructing your masculine traits, these aren't neutral observations. They're productive forces shaping your understanding of yourself. The tragedy is that this systematic undermining of masculine confidence creates the very problems it claims to solve. Men who are ashamed of their masculinity don't become better partners. They become anxious, needy, and unattractive. Men who constantly apologize for their nature don't create safer spaces. They create environments filled with walking on eggshells tension. Men who suppress their competitive instincts don't become more collaborative. They become passive-aggressive and resentful. You've been sold a lie that your masculine nature is the enemy of love, connection, and social harmony. But look around at the men who are genuinely loved and respected by both men and women. Are they the ones who constantly apologize for being male? Are they the ones who have successfully suppressed their competitive instincts and sexual energy? Number. They're the ones who have integrated their masculine nature with wisdom and integrity, who are comfortable in their own skin, who don't need permission to exist as men. The system profits from your confusion in multiple ways. Insecure men are better consumers. They buy products to fix their perceived inadequacies. Ashamed men are better employees. They work harder to prove their worth and are less likely to demand what they deserve. Uncertain men are better subjects. They look to external authorities for validation and direction rather than trusting their own judgment. Foucault spoke of counterconducts, forms of resistance to the way power attempts to conduct our conduct. Your counterconduct begins with recognizing that your shame about being a man isn't moral evolution, it's psychological manipulation. It continues with understanding that your masculine energy isn't toxic, it's powerful, and powerful things can be dangerous when misused, but that doesn't make them inherently evil. True masculine development isn't about becoming less masculine, it's about becoming more skillfully masculine. It's about channeling your competitive drive toward worthy goals, expressing your protective instincts in appropriate contexts, using your sexual energy to create genuine attraction and connection rather than objectification or coercion. This requires wisdom, not suppression. It requires integration, not amputation. The path forward isn't through more shame workshops, more privilege checking, more deconstruction of your masculine nature. The path forward is through radical self-acceptance coupled with intelligent development. You must first accept that your masculine nature is not broken, then commit to expressing it in ways that serve your highest values and deepest purposes. This means reclaiming your right to take up space without apologizing. It means trusting your instincts while continuing to refine your judgment. It means competing fiercely while maintaining integrity. It means pursuing what you want without becoming entitled or cruel. It means leading when appropriate without becoming domineering. It means protecting those you care about without becoming controlling. Foucault understood that resistance is always possible, that power relations are always unstable, always open to challenge. Where there is power, there is resistance, he declared. The question is, are you ready to resist? Are you ready to stop being your own prison guard? Are you ready to reject the surveillance apparatus you've internalized and reclaim your authentic masculine essence? This resistance begins in the most intimate spaces of your life. It begins when you stop censoring your thoughts before you think them. It begins when you stop apologizing for having preferences, desires, and standards. It begins when you recognize that your natural masculine confidence isn't arrogance, it's birthright. It begins when you understand that your competitive spirit isn't toxic, it's life force. It begins when you realize that your sexual energy isn't objectification, it's the creative principle that drives life itself. The system has taught you to fear your own power because powerful men are difficult to control. They've convinced you that your strength is dangerous because strong men don't easily accept abuse. They've made you ashamed of your confidence because confident men don't constantly seek external validation. They've pathologized your independence because independent men don't make reliable subjects. But here's what they can never take from you: the knowledge that you are not broken. Your masculinity is not a disease to be cured or a problem to be solved. You are not inherently toxic, privileged, or dangerous simply by virtue of being male. You are a human being with masculine energy, and that energy, when channeled with wisdom and integrity, is one of the most beautiful, creative, and beneficial forces in the universe. The revolution begins when you stop surveilling yourself, stop policing your own masculinity, stop allowing shame to dictate your choices. It begins when you recognize that the system's greatest fear is not toxic masculinity, it's authentic masculinity, uncontrolled and unashamed. Because when men are truly themselves, when they stop apologizing for their existence, when they reclaim their natural power and confidence, they become impossible to control. This doesn't mean becoming a tyrant or embracing genuine toxicity. It means distinguishing between authentic masculine strength and the caricature of masculinity they've created to justify their control over you. It means understanding that your desire to achieve, to compete, to lead, to protect, to pursue, to build, these aren't expressions of toxic patriarchy. These are expressions of masculine life force that the world desperately needs, channeled through consciousness and directed toward worthy purposes. The world doesn't need fewer masculine men. It needs more conscious masculine men. It doesn't need men who are ashamed of their nature. It needs men who are proud of their nature and committed to expressing it with wisdom. It doesn't need men who apologize for existing. It needs men who are grateful for their existence and determined to make it count. Your shame is not serving anyone. It's not making women safer. Insecure men are more dangerous than confident men. It's not making the world more equal. Men who hate themselves can't contribute to healing collective wounds. It's not making you a better person. People who are ashamed of their essential nature can't achieve authentic self-actualization. Foucault spoke of care of the self as a fundamental practice of freedom. But the care of the self they're offering you today is actually care of the system that needs you diminished. True care of the self means rejecting their definitions of who you should be and embracing the fullness of your masculine nature, without apology, without shame, without the constant need for external validation. This is your moment of choice. You can continue living as a prisoner in your own psychological panopticon, constantly watching yourself, judging yourself, suppressing yourself according to standards designed to keep you manageable. Or you can step out of the watchtower, reject the surveillance apparatus you've internalized, and reclaim your birthright as a man who needs no permission to exist fully and authentically in this world. The system has made you ashamed of being a man because ashamed men are profitable. Confident, authentic, unapologetic men are dangerous to any system that depends on psychological control. The question is, which man will you choose to be? The answer will determine not just your own destiny, but the destiny of every man who looks to you as an example of what's possible when someone finally decides to stop apologizing for their own existence and starts living as the powerful, authentic, magnificently masculine being they were born to be. Your liberation is not just personal, it's political. Every time you refuse to be ashamed of your masculinity, you strike a blow against the system that profits from that shame. Every time you express your authentic masculine nature with consciousness and integrity, you give permission to other men to do the same. Every time you choose confidence over apology, strength over submission, authenticity over acceptability, you participate in the revolutionary act of being genuinely, unapologetically, powerfully yourself. The time for shame is over. The time for apology is over. The time for voluntary self-suppression is over. The time has come to remember who you are, to reclaim what was never theirs to take, and to stand as a man in the fullness of your power, ready to meet whatever challenges this world presents with the confidence, strength, and authentic masculine presence that is your birthright and your gift to a world that desperately needs real men more than it needs manageable subjects.